Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the flexibility phase because it's actually something I did a way too long flexibility phase. I actually took off weightlifting from I think I stopped when I was like 24, and I had this weird period from like 24 until like maybe age I don't know, 28, maybe 29, where I just wasn't lifting. And
Mhm.
I was working on my flexibility, I was working on, kind of active mobility, and I was really working on muscle activation. I was like but I was spending way too long preparing. Like I was like, I'm gonna be so strong when I get back into weightlifting. And then like 3 years later, I'm like, what am I waiting for? Like how much time do I possibly need to prep my body to do this? And I eventually did get back into weightlifting. Um, and I say that because two things. Number one, because the difference between like how I used to weightlift versus how I weightlift now, with all of the increased mobility, flexibility, muscle awareness, and proper muscle activation, is totally different. Deadlifts feel completely different than they did before. Squats feel totally different. Um, Even like a bent over dumbbell row. So all these, and if you're listening and you're like, Dean, I don't weightlift, I don't know what that is. Basically, these are like essential, very common, basic, foundational weightlifting exercises that totally change. They feel totally different just because I basically retrained my body to have more flexibility and more active mobility, more muscle activation, all these things we kind of talk about in Manful Yoga workouts. And the second reason I bring that up is because we have a lot of people who come into Manful Yoga, and there's one program in particular that I'm thinking of called the Strength Foundations Challenge or the Strength Foundations course, and it's super intense. And people ask like, "Can I do this with weightlifting?" And I'm like, "Well, you could, and it's a good, if you want to keep it up, you could." But I've had so many people abstain from weightlifting and just focus on this for like 6 weeks, and they come back into weightlifting. They're like, "Oh wow, like this feels totally different. I'm lifting way better than I did before. I'm not as sore the day afterwards." So we kind of, you take the time to work on this flexibility, mobility. You plug the gaps of your fitness, so to speak, and you just have to you can do it temporarily where you kind of plug your ego for like 6 weeks and you're like, okay, I'm not gonna lift heavy, which is hard for a lot of us, right? We really like going into the gym and lifting weights and like getting big and big and strong. And like you said, when you're looking at other people in the gym and they're doing that and you're doing like a pigeon, you're like, "Ugh, this doesn't feel that badass." um, but if you can put aside your ego for a few weeks or a second and actually do things that are going to help you with your longevity, and your mobility, not only are you going to be able to go back to doing those things better than you did before, but you're also going to be able to do them for a much longer time. So
Mhm.
I like the flexibility phase that you brought up. How long, in your experience, how long does that flexibility phase last?
It's highly dependent on your starting point. If there was someone like me who was dealing with, the strange hip impingement stuff, and I also had super tight ankles from playing soccer my whole life, and my genetic starting point was kind of stiff Tin Man style, like I'm on that end of the spectrum. It
Hmm.
might take a little bit longer. I think I also did kind of what you did, where I kind of just, after multiple injuries, I was like, okay, I'm just setting weightlifting way, way, way on the back burner. Like I'm barely going to do it. And I'm just going
Mm.
to go gung ho into this mobility thing. And I watched, every Kelly Starrett video on YouTube twice.
Yeah.
And, I was like literally doing hours and hours and hours of mobility a day, because I would change from like having personal training clients to having mobility clients. And so whenever they were mobilizing, I was mobilizing, because I'm not just going to sit there and
Right.
watch you foam roll. And so I literally was doing hours and hours and hours of like stretching, mobility, massage, band distracted exercises, and just being, I basically morphed in a several, month to year period, um, from, weightlifting sprinter guy to bendy flexible yoga guy. And I got to the place where I could do the front splits, the side splits, the pancake splits, the head to
Hmm.
toe stretch, which is like a forward fold, but you actually touch your head to your toes with a straight leg. So it's like I got crazy flexible.
Hmm.
And so, it took me a couple months to have a breakthrough, a couple years to ingrain that flexibility, and then like 10 plus years to master it, I would say. But
Wow.
after about 2 to 3 years of that, where I had like really gotten good at it and could do all those fancy splits things,
Hmm.
I didn't feel optimal. And that's when I reintegrated the strength training because I had gotten my joints like too bendy and loosey, and I
Yeah.
didn't have enough strength and stability in them to make me feel optimal. So it
Hmm.
really depends on the person. Some people can do it concurrently. I've had clients where, they're doing strength training with me, and I just superset all of their strength work with some mobility pieces, and that gets them
Hmm.
that 10% that they needed, and they're good. Other people are like starting super stiff, and we need to like have them doing a mostly yoga, flexibility, mobility type routine with a little bit of strength training. And
Hmm.
then slowly it can kind of morph over time as they really regain that mobility into a more balanced, holistic routine that incorporates strength and cardio and mobility, which I think is the recipe for long term longevity to have at least all three of those things.
Hope you enjoyed that. Click over here if you want to watch another clip from the podcast. If you haven't subscribed, click over here to subscribe and check out full episodes on any major podcasting platform, full video episodes on the Better Man Podcast YouTube channel.